Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today. This is the first session on the global stage of Day 2 at Arabian Travel Market. My name is Karen Osman, and I will be moderating today's session, which is business travel and the sharing economy, specifically looking at the pros and cons of that travel trend. Now, I'm joined by a panel of 3 experts today. We have from Careem, we have Basil Al-Nalhui, am I pronouncing that correctly? Vice President of Business Development and Government Relations. We have Scott Booth on the end there, Senior Research Director at YouGov. And finally, from Travelport, we have Matthew Powell, Managing Director of Middle East and South Asia for Travelport. So, sharing economy services like Airbnb and Careem have slowly entered the mainstream business travel corporate market as business travelers are bringing their leisure preferences into the corporate world. A global business travel association study found that business travel ridership such as Uber and Lyft have increased 21% since mid-2016. Accommodation alternatives such as Airbnb have increased by 20%. Now, this study interviewed almost 3,500 business travelers from North America, Australia, parts of Europe, and Asia. So the question I really want to begin with today is, are we seeing those sorts of numbers and increases in this region? And I think, Scott, that's a great question for you to sort of give an overview in terms of this topic.
We are seeing those kinds of dramatic increases here. So we are a bit of a trailing market when it comes to adoption of the sharing economy. Some companies like Careem have increased the adoption in the region, but we still trail when it comes to adoption of Airbnb and particularly sharing of accommodation. What we see is when we focus on business travel itself, we see a tremendous adoption of transportation services. Yeah. We don't see the same volume of adoption in accommodation. So whether there's a specific block, I think perhaps Travelport can speak to, but we see a different kind of decision paradigm between transportation and accommodation. And for whatever reason, accommodation isn't really catering to the business travelers here right now.
Yeah, okay. So in general, you're saying Middle East is a slower adopter of a sharing economy when it comes to business travelers.
So we're seeing, even among transportation, we're seeing penetration in terms of consideration, what we call consideration. The next time you use transportation services, which of these brands would you consider? When we look at Careem and Uber, we're seeing consideration around 10%. Okay. When we look at Airbnb, we're seeing consideration around 2%. Yeah. So there's a different kind of magnitude in consideration.
Yeah, okay. Which is great news for the likes of you, Basil. I mean, you know, it's a local success story that's being created here. Why do you think business travel or business travelers are really showing a preference for ridership as opposed to accommodation?
I think one of the main reasons is because historically our hotel industry is pretty an advanced one here, right? Wherever you travel in the Middle East, options are there. It's easy to book. It's convenient. It's transparent. And the standards are pretty high, even if you compare it globally. However, when it comes to ground transportation, our region suffers from lack of infrastructure across the board. Maybe Dubai is an exception, but as soon as you leave Dubai and you wander off to the rest of the region, whether it's towards Morocco or towards Pakistan, there's a lot of white spaces. We, unlike the West, haven't built infrastructure over centuries to make moving from A to B easier. So naturally, people are hungrier for this type of service because it makes their life easier, more safe, more convenient. I think that's really the main reason behind our higher rate of adoption.
And we were talking earlier backstage, Scott, weren't we, about hotels offering things like loyalty programs and things like that, which may also factor in the reluctance for business travelers.
Right. So when you look at the decision paradigm for business travelers versus leisure, so I think Airbnb is quite attractive for a leisure trip. You have great freedom. Typically, it's a little bit less expensive. You can stay with what we find makes it quite popular with leisure travelers in the region is you can stay with your whole family or an extended group of friends, and actually the cost is not even competitive to a hotel at the same kind of person volume per travel group. When you look at business travel, we're looking for simplicity. We're looking for everything packaged all in one. So I don't want to wake up and try to figure out breakfast and try to sort out all the other details of my morning as I get my business going. I just want to wake up, go downstairs, grab a croissant, and get on my way.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different decision paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the biggest impact this trend is having on the business travel industry, I mean, from a technology point of view, and we'll come on to this a little bit later in more detail, are you seeing a huge development from a technology perspective, a demand for the technology to power through some of these companies like Careem?
Yeah, I mean, very, very much so. And we're seeing a demand from our customers to have full integration. So from a platform standpoint, and from a travel agency and an online travel agent standpoint, they want to have access to all the content they can get access to. So from a travel port perspective, it's very critical that we're able to integrate suppliers such as Careem and Uber and Airbnb into the platform. What's interesting to me is I think that if you look at it, going back to the previous comments, a lot of it's actually controlled by the travel managers in the business travel space. So the transport's often been kind of unregulated, if you like. The traveler that walks out of the airport, they get in a taxi, and that's why you're seeing that demand. The hotel space, I think, is still very much controlled by the travel manager, by the corporation they're working for. And that's a change I think you're going to start seeing over time as that expands going forward. What we're also seeing is kind of a mix. We're seeing that in the Middle East, for example, Careem is used extensively. But when the travelers actually leave the Middle East, they then start reverting back to their old methods, and they still get into the taxi. So it's kind of a strange one where we're seeing that mix where it's perfectly acceptable here to use Careem and Uber. But then it's not that natural instinct to say, now I'm in New York or London, I'll now jump on and try and book. And that's the paradigm we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah. So it's very much knowledge about the region, or not even the region, but the country, the city where you are.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I do think it comes down to, as well, what Basil said, which is expectations. If I know what I'm going to get. When I book Careem, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I get my text saying he's on the way, I can monitor where he is. I then don't have to pay, I get out of the car and it's done. And I think that's more and more that simplicity is making it easier for people. I was in London a couple of weeks ago and almost walked out of a taxi without paying because I'm so used to not paying cash for the ride. And I think that ease of use and linked with the technology side just makes it great. We can see where the driver is, we rate him, he rates us. And you get that kind of full service that you've never had before. And I think that's why the transport side probably is being adopted faster than the Airbnb and the accommodation side.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking earlier about how Careem started off as a corporate offering and how different it is depending on the city that you're operating in. Can you tell us a little bit about those differences within the region in terms of what the customer is wanting?
Yeah, of course. So as you said, Careem did start as a corporate product, right? And catering to the corporate world, because our founders were consultants who traveled around the Middle East. And as a consultant, booking your flight is easy, booking your hotel is pretty easy. But as soon as you land in a foreign airport, you're not sure if the driver will take you to the right place, if it's how much it's really gonna cost you, is he gonna get lost on the way? So that's how Careem started, saying, all right, let's solve this problem that we face every single day, every single week we travel. And then it grew and started targeting consumers too. The difference is the minute we expanded from Dubai and entered the Saudi market, one example is the team quickly realized the Saudi consumer doesn't like to use their credit card, even if they have a credit card. And that was a big obstacle for adoption. So within 3 months, we introduced the cash option to pay through cash. And that just skyrocketed the growth, creating another option. Okay, it's an operational nightmare. However, it brings a lot of convenience to that specific segment in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Another option was, the region wasn't ready for booking now. They didn't maybe trust the technology to find a car at 4 a.m. before you want to go to the airport. So we brought in a later booking option where you can book before you go to bed, wake up, and the car is there. Now we see adoption of the Now service growing compared to later bookings. But these are the differences or the local problems that differ from country to country that help us innovate and capture that market quicker than any other player in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving on now to some of the pros and cons of the sharing economy. I think, Basil, it's clear how advantageous it is for your business to have, HR managers of major companies allowing them to travel by the likes of Kareem. How important is the business traveler for your sector, for your industry today?
It's very important. The business travelers are actually the most loyal customers too. And for them, every company looks at their travel in two ways and through two lenses. One is costs, and the other one is safety of their employees. If you talk to all the major corporations, that's usually the two topics they bring up. In terms of safety, we've raised the bar in this market because today our drivers go through a lot of training, a lot of background checks. In certain countries, we actually do military background checks, depending on the country itself. We visit a captain's home to make sure he is the person he claims to be, and so on. So they go through a lot of vetting process before they become captains on the Careem platform. So this, that checks the box for safety. The other one is cost. With the exception of a very few cities, in the 60 cities we operate in, we're actually cheaper than your regular transportation option, cheaper than taxis and so on because of the business model. The sharing economy has been around for decades. It was first getting sugar from your neighbor and giving him flour the next day. But today it's, how can I use your car to move from A to B in the most convenient way? As long as there's supply and demand, and where it is, right? Supply is there because it's creating employment. Careem is actually creating employment. Today we've created over 200,000 jobs in our region, captains who have joined the Careem platform. And that was obvious for us from day one. What wasn't obvious is, the jobs Careem will create indirectly, which was the Minister of Labor in Saudi Arabia came out and said, now with Careem in the market, there will be 2 to 3 million women who will secure jobs because now they have a reliable source of transportation back and forth from home to the office.
Yeah, and that's a huge advantage. And similarly, from a technology perspective, I guess, this constant innovation, responding to what the customer wants, can only benefit, a technology business like yours. What's your take on the pros, and are there any cons?
100%. And from a travel perspective, we're very focused on giving customers what they want. And this is definitely a demand we're hearing, not only in the corporate world, but also from the online customers and also just the traditional travel agency. And just the travelers as a whole, they want to be able to book these services. So as a travel agent, you want to have that full choice. Whether that's the car hire, whether it's the taxi, the hotel. So from a travel perspective, it's critical for us from a platform perspective to have the content there. And that's what we're very focused on doing. We need to keep up and focus. As these guys come out with new technologies and new ideas, we need to work out how we implement that, integrate it into our platform, and then distribute it down to our customers. From a pro standpoint, again, looking at Kareem, the benefit is that local knowledge. Right? They are a local company, even though you're expanding, and you do those background checks. You know who the passengers are. So if I'm flying at 4 a.m. in the morning, I know that that car's going to be outside my house at 4 o'clock in the morning. I could never guarantee that with a taxi service or any other service, and that's really the positives. The cons, I think, are limited. I think it's really the industry's growing, it's changing. They say the sharing economy has been around for years, and it's just kind of that next evolution. And from our standpoint, technology is just making it easier. Whether it's mobile devices or tablets, just having access to that information and be able to request that car or that hotel room here and now, is really the key benefit that we're seeing.
Scott, I mean, any input from you in terms of pros and cons of this industry? Of this trend?
We're talking a lot about transportation. I know why. I mean, we're adopting it more. I think there are more pros to the sharing economy from a transportation and business travel perspective than there maybe are cons. The biggest pro I can think of is being able to electronically hail a car from a distance without having to pay for a private driver. So you are in effect paying for a private driver, but if you're stuck outside of a city in the Middle East, it's very difficult to find a taxi, very easy to hail a Careem. So there's a huge pro there. In terms of pros for accommodation, in the sharing economy, I think they're limited. I think they're limited predominantly to cost. I think you can get a better quality accommodation at a lower cost with Airbnb than you can maybe with a hotel, if you compare room dimensions and technology available and other aspects of the accommodation. When you look at the full service aspect, that's an obvious con for accommodation. I can't necessarily think of any. If I try to put myself in my own shoes, in other business travelers' shoes, as far as transportation, as you said, the cost is comparable or even less than a taxi in some parts of the region. So it's difficult to point out any downsides of that.
Yeah.
I think, just on going back to the cons, going back to the accommodation side, and in the business travel space, it's that expectation of what you're going to get. When you stay at a hotel, for example, you're going to have Wi-Fi, you're going to have good service. It's all going to work 9 times out of 10. I think where it becomes riskier in the shared economy with the likes of Airbnb using that for the corporate travel, is you don't really know what you're going to get. And it's a bit of a lottery. With the car services, that becomes less risky. It's a ride. You have good rides, bad rides, but it's not the end of the world. But if you're rolling up to a town and you're staying there for a week, and as a business traveler, you want to know what you're going to get. And that's that risk you don't always get with the likes of Airbnb, for example. And I'd say that was probably one of the downsides or one of the cons for the corporate traveler in that space.
Do you think technology could address that problem?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we obviously all these companies kind of rely on user feedback, past experiences, ratings, and I think as they become more and more mature, you're going to see that expand. And we've seen that with the likes of TripAdvisor outside of on how you validate, how we check the feedback, how we make sure it's relevant. And I think more and more you're going to see that happen. And as we get more and more rich content, we'll see more of that kind of building into that environment where we already do it in the airspace, where you can actually see the sea, you can experience the sea, so you know whether you're going to get a flatbed or not. And I think as technology expands, you'll be able to see like the inside of the car, you'll be able to get a 360 view of it, and technology just allows that to happen. And I think that's just a matter of time for that to actually materialize.
Yeah, and maybe elements such as virtual reality and
100%.
Those kind of things will really change that. And I think it's already changing, just perhaps not in this region. A report from an expense service, Certify, found that Airbnb transactions in business travel have doubled each year since 2014 in the US. And Uber is now one of the most expensive companies in the US. So I think probably certain markets are a little bit more mature, and as it moves forward and technology comes in and ratings and everything, maybe the accommodation side will lift slightly, which is good news for hotels, because I know they rely on the business traveler as well as for a huge part of that. So coming back to the pros and cons, internationally, I mean, which areas do you think are embracing this trend? Are you seeing certain sectors, for example, law versus people who work in travel and tourism, for example? Are you seeing certain sectors there that are embracing this trend a little bit more of a sharing economy?
Well, from my side, the obvious one's the millennial segment.
Yeah.
And we're talking a lot about millennials here at ATM. And from my perspective, the millennials are kind of drivers. The requirement to have access to information, be able to hail a car here and then, here and now, and just have everything at the fingertips. But what we're actually seeing is that then spreading across all age groups and all segmentations, really. So everyone talks about millennials, and it's kind of what we were talking about, but we are seeing that kind of resonate across all segments. I personally don't think there's any kind of set segment that you can say is more or less likely to book. Basil probably has more kind of input into his customer profile, but I know from being here, everyone books Kareem or Uber. I know people who are all age groups who book their Airbnb, so it's definitely spreading. I'm not sure you can actually put it into a bucket.
Yeah.
I think interesting you mentioned millennials. We're talking about millennials in tourism tomorrow afternoon, but topic near and dear to my heart. When you look at Airbnb and the segments who might be most interested in it, I think we spoke briefly earlier about SMEs. So SME, particularly leaders of SMEs, are quite. There's a different decision paradigm. So cost becomes much more important when you're a small, streamlined business versus what other considerations you might have as a much larger corporate. So Airbnb then becomes significantly more attractive. Options in Saudi like Go and Go Plus for Kareem might become much more attractive. And so you have significant advantages for certain types of businesses. Sector-wise, except for sectors where you have a heavier proportion of SMEs, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think you have a different mindset when you're a business owner, and I think there's an interesting statistic out there that business owners now are younger than ever, and between 25 and 35, it's that's no longer about working your way up the ladder. It's about creating your own business and your own venture. So maybe there's definitely scope for that.
I think the millennials might be the early adopters. But at least in our sector, you can see the business traveler. It's just across the board now spreading, because maybe the millennials are looking for the cost element, or the SMEs are looking for the cost element. However, the more mature business traveler, if you want to call him, or he's looking for better customer service, higher reliability. He's trying to maximize his time. Avoid traffic, don't want to deal with parking, and so on. So all these things add hours to his day. If it was a 12-hour day, he just gained another 2 hours because of these conveniences that are coming. So maybe the millennials are starting with the early adoption. However, it's spreading across all segments, at least in our field.
Yeah. And I think there's a huge scope here for influencing, HR directors of large multinationals. Budgets are becoming critical, I think, and people are looking at budgets carefully and where that money is being spent. So I agree with you.
We're very data-driven, and this is another advantage you get as a corporation. At the end of the month, you get a report, you understand what your costs are, you understand where the leakage is happening, right? So one of our largest clients, at the end of the month, we said, 20% of your cost is just waiting time. Your employees are actually calling a car and just having him wait for 45 minutes, 30 minutes. If you just improve that behavior, you'll save 20% cost. So we're also driving costs down further than they are already by the product itself.
Yeah, and I think that's one advantage of the sharing economy is that minefield of data that
Exactly.
you know you have access to as a business and you can then share with your clients. So moving on now to a little bit more in detail to technology and communication or promotion of these services. Matt, I mean, starting with you, what products and or technology do you think is critical to this region to encourage the sharing economy even further?
For me, it's mobile. Digital mobile, and looking at how users have access to this information as quickly as possible. And that's where the Middle East is an early adopter of mobile technology, as we've seen. And you've got a high proportion of millennials across the entire region. So for me, those two factors are really driving the shared economy across the Middle East. If you look at Saudi, for example, there's a high percentage of millennials. They are looking to spend money, and that's driving out through all aspects of the travel industry. So, for me, this then becomes one part of that. But as we're capturing that market, you get into the mobile space, and we're focusing a lot of time on what are we doing in mobile. Our projections basically say that we believe that something around about 70% of all bookings or travel bookings will be booked on a mobile device within the next 3 or 4 years. So if you take that fact, then you look at companies such as Airbnb, Careem, Uber, and others. That then becomes a natural extension. And I think for me that's the one critical space. How the companies then get more clever, I guess, within those apps, within those environments, give more of a user experience is obviously, I guess, someone like Basil can comment on as we grow. And if I look at it, if I take Careem from 2 or 3 years ago to the app now, it's very different. And that user experience is more user friendly. It's very simple, very easy, and that's what it has to be in that world to capture that market and just make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, and are you finding that different regions are adopting the technology faster? For example, Basil was saying earlier about a reluctance to use credit cards in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you cover Middle East and Asia. Do you find that there's a higher demand or a higher adoption of technology in certain areas?
Yeah, for me, across the entire Middle East and South Asia region, we're seeing real adoption. We've kind of leapfrogged. We've leapfrogged the US and Europe from a technology standpoint. Most people in this room probably have at least one, probably 2 mobile devices. You've got tablets and other technologies. So we are an early adopter in this region. What we're not necessarily seeing is the adoption of the apps and the products, which is interesting because technology is there, and it's how we then kind of get customers or users to actually use those apps going forward.
Yeah.
But what you do have is local anomalies, and I think that's to Basil's point, that's where it's very difficult to take a company from the US and just deploy it into somewhere like Saudi Arabia, where there is just a reluctance, and you'd never know that until you're there and you're actually talking to people and you're there to say, well, there's high credit card penetration, they don't like using it. And that's where it is important for all of us to kind of do a deep dive into those local anomalies. It's all very well taking a product, deploying it globally, but when you actually get on the ground into a country, it's you don't know until you're there.
Yeah.
And that's the critical part. But I think that's where Careem obviously have kind of worked around that, because you go in, you understand it, then you've come up with another solution, which is the cash solution. And I think that's where companies like Airbnb may be struggling in this region a little bit, is kind of taking a global model, and Uber, to be honest, taking that global model and deploying it into the Middle East. You have to we're advanced technology-wise, but it's still a lot of local anomalies that you have to account for.
And I think an element of simplicity. I mean, I was just on Careem yesterday. I mean, it really is so simple to follow. And I think, that probably is quite critical in encouraging people to use the app and trust that the car will arrive, or that the the Airbnb will be there when, and ready for you.
And I think here you've got a strong desire to use technology. Just looking in this room, you've got people on their phones and taking photos, and we're there all the time. But there's also a reliance here to have that local touch. So being able to say call the Careem help desk, or email someone who's going to respond to you, they're probably sitting locally, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think for this part of the world, getting the adoption is kind of bringing it along two sides.
Yeah.
Yes, we have got strong penetration of technology and desire to use it and strong millennial base, but you still need to say there's a local culture of having that high touch. So having the balance between the two brings that together.
Yeah, yeah. And that really brings me on to quite nicely onto the next question about the sharing economy relies so heavily on technology in terms of apps, booking portals and so on, which can remove the personalization. So how do you address that, especially with this region in general being known for its high level of, I suppose, luxury, and we're very used to a high standard of living here. How do you mix that combination of technology, but with the personalization, if and when something does go wrong? Go ahead.
So I quite think it's the opposite. You actually can add much more to it. If you think about it now, it's much more personalized. You have full control over your journey before you even get there. You know your captain's name, you know his mobile number, he knows who you are, you know what his ratings are, you know where the car is and how long it's going to come till it gets to you. And then, if it's picking up your son or child, where it's going. So you have this tracking capability. And in terms of luxury, you have the options, right? You can either take a Go car or an economy. You can take a first class car for a completely different experience. You can get Wi-Fi in your car. And all these things are choices now that you have with a tap of button without really even talking to someone.
Yeah.
And if you do want to talk to someone, then you can call the call center. So it goes back to the point of balancing, right? In our region, we know people still like to actually pick up the phone and whether it is complain or get assistance. So I think it's more personalized now, and we can even push that to our consumers in a much faster way, given the technology.
Yeah.
I don't think we have that gap isn't there really.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the critical part. It's that personalization. That's something we're very focused on, not only in this segment, but across all our products at Travelport, is how do we give the customized, personalized service to the traveler? And that's the thing we have to do, and all companies have to do that going forward. The days of just saying, we're going to book a flight from A to B have gone, because you can now select, whether you want extra legroom or baggage, and it has to be that personalized service. And what we know is that travelers overall, being driven by the millennial segment, are kind of looking for that experience side more. And they want to personalize that experience. And you have to give all those options. So being able to, as you say, in the app, be able to look at where the car is, where the driver is, where it's in the hotel space, be able to understand exactly where the key is going to be, what it's going to look like when you walk through the door, is critical to what everyone wants to know, because they want to understand their experience before they actually embark on that trip.
Yeah.
And that's where technology is going to drive that direction going forward.
So you find that face-to-face human interaction is not as important for some people as being able to choose their own preferences, their own choices, how they want to travel and so on.
And I think in this part of the world, it's probably a step by step. Because we leapfrogged kind of the US and Europe, we kind of hit the ground running, and it all came at once.
Yeah.
So there's people are quite happy or are comfortable, I guess, having that ability to pick up the phone and talk to someone. But more and more, you'll find they do it less and less, because as the apps and the technology advances, and people become more and more comfortable with it, then they won't. And I don't think anyone will realize that has happened until it's happened. And more they'll just get used to trusting the app and trusting the products. And it comes down to trust. If you know that car's going to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning, or the Airbnb is going to look exactly like it did on the picture, then you'll become more and more comfortable with it and get that assurance.
Yeah. Is that what you found, Scott? Your data is representing this trend?
From a data perspective, I would say a couple of different things. First, I think the evidence agrees with what's being said. There's actually greater personalization. There's greater me ability. If we talk about millennials, there's a greater ability to make the product fit you in sharing economy versus classical economy. if you want personalized service from a hotel, the way to do that historically is to become very loyal, get some kind of status, and then you get recognition and rewards for that. With Airbnb, that doesn't exist. To an extent, yes, it does, but really what you're getting is a one-on-one interaction with a property owner or a property manager, and that can become very personal if you wanted to. Kareem, as an example, you transcend the language barrier in a lot of cases. For some of us, that's quite important. You transcend the inability to navigate to a destination, for instance. That's no longer necessary, but the ride is yours. It's very so the personalization is heightened in that sense. In terms of what travelers actually want, business travelers, I would say, need less personalization than leisure travelers, just based on what we find from drivers of preference. However, the recognition that you get from a loyalty program is a good example of where personalization does drive business decision making. So to the extent that companies like Kareem, companies like Airbnb, any other sharing economy companies can develop a recognition strategy for frequent travelers, for specific businesses that use the service maybe quite a lot, I think the evidence would suggest that will drive adoption by businesses.
Yeah, interesting. And Matt, I mean, how competitive do you expect the sharing economy from a business traveler perspective to be? Are you seeing a lot of competition? Maybe actually, Basil, this is a good question for you. Do you see a lot of competition for products such as yours for the business traveler? Is that something you're preparing for in the future or even now?
No, it's already there. Competition is definitely there. As long as you're solving a problem and you're solving with a solution that is better than the status quo, there's going to be competition. There's going to be a lot of people who jump on this opportunity. So in our case, we're solving a massive problem when it comes to transportation. So yes, competition is there and will continue to be there across all our markets. I think the winner will be the business that actually innovates to actually solve, like I said earlier, the local problem versus bring in a one-size-fits-all solution to that market. So, and this is where the innovator will succeed in this case.
Yeah. But challenging from an operational point of view to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. The more you provide, the more complex it becomes.
Yeah.
So it has to be done in a very smart way, and the key is innovative way.
Yeah.
But with technology, there's always a way to find a simpler way to do it.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so moving on now to, I suppose, the future and leveraging the trend. I'm presuming that all three of you are business travelers yourselves. I mean, do you use Airbnb when you go for your business trips, or are you hotels, or what's your own sort of personal preferences?
So I think Airbnb has its place. If you're traveling within the region, Airbnb, at least personal experience, doesn't quite cater to the short hop trip where you need to be in a financial center of a city doing business. It doesn't. The properties that are available, the types of bookings that are available, don't really cater to that market. That isn't to say that in certain regions it isn't fantastic. In Hong Kong, there's an Airbnb right across from my office. That's quite easy. There's a breakfast shop just downstairs. I would argue that's even better than a hotel in some ways. In terms of the future, I think any sharing economy business, if it wants to capture more of the business traveler market share, will really need to focus on the decision drivers of that travel. So rewarding a company or an individual for repeat business, the type of repeat business you get with business travel is integral to getting especially corporate business. Making it make sense for the company from a rewards, from a discount. There are multiple perspectives there, that multiple levers that can be used with a corporate, but making it make sense from that perspective will be critical. I think, frankly, transportation has already cracked it. There are more tweaks, little bits and bobs that can be done here and there, but accommodation, I think, needs to maybe focus a little bit more on this.
Yeah, and I think another trend that maybe filters into accommodation is the rise of the bleisure trend, where frequent business travelers are extending their business trip 2 or 3 days into a more leisure-orientated trip, maybe bringing the family along to explore a new destination. So this could be a possible area as well for accommodation the sharing aspect of accommodation to really take off. So.
Absolutely. I think I'm really interested to hear Matt's perspective on that. So bleisure travel is relatively new. We don't honestly see great indications of it in terms of volume from a consumer standpoint. That isn't to say it isn't happening, but we don't know a lot about why. We don't know a lot about it's specific types of trips, and we know that, we can measure that, but we don't really understand the drivers behind it. What makes the difference between a 3-day trip from Tuesday to Thursday where you go straight home and one where you stay over until Sunday? Is it destination? Is it offering? Is it, we just don't have as tight an understanding of that as normal business travel.
Matt, how about you? I mean, you've traveled quite frequently, I guess, for your role across the 2 regions.
Yeah, a lot. And I'll be honest, I use hotels for my business travel, but I am an Airbnb user, but only for pleasure. For me on that side, it's very much focused on what I said earlier, which is I know the hotel, I've got loyalty. I know what I'm going to get. I know breakfast is going to be served, and it just works. And for those trips, it's literally a bed that you put your head down, you get up, you grab a coffee, you're out the next day, and you just want to make sure it works. So from I don't consider Airbnb for business travel. And again, it comes down to location. Like Scott said, it's pretty rare that location is right where I need to be. And that's what really drives a lot of my decisions around the hotel. I do use Airbnb though for pleasure, and have done extensively. So, and that's the balance I think we find there in the car space. Yeah, I do. I use Kareem a lot. You can thank me for that later. But then I do use Uber across Europe because it's easy and it's there. It's on my phone. I don't have to worry about how I find a taxi when I walk outside the restaurant because I can hail it there and then. So that's the difference there. And then in the pleasure space, I'm with Scott. Everyone's kind of talking about it. It's there. Actually, is it actually there? Is it measurable? We are seeing some indications, but it is very limited. And I think what you probably find in that environment is, and looking at me personally, I'll go on a business trip, and quite often all I want to do is get home. So it has to be the right destination. It has to tie in with your other plans. And I think what I would probably end up doing, I'd stay in the hotel for the business part of the trip. Then I may look to move elsewhere for the pleasure part of it. I think that's what you'll find is there'll probably still be that mix, at least for the short term, from what we're seeing.
So from a future perspective, it's probably still a lot of factors determining that pleasure trend to make it something that's concrete. For the future.
I think it is. I think again, you go back to the travel managers in the corporations and in the corporate travel agents. They're making a lot of their decisions around what's the right property to do business from. So if it works, like Scott's location in Hong Kong, yeah, why not? Maybe they do say, yep, use this location because it's just across the street, it's cheaper, and it works. But whether that works in every location, and it needs the travel managers to evolve into looking at these options to say, is there a viable option? But sometimes it would just be easier to say, we're going to go with hotel brand X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Okay. And Basil, I mean, to finish up, what do you believe is the future for business travel from a sharing economy perspective? What's your predictions?
As long as it simplifies the journey and the experience, it will continue to grow, right? And I think companies in this space will continue to innovate, to improve that, increase efficiency. I think the next step in ride-hailing, at least, is autonomous vehicles, right? Driverless cars that can actually eventually just get rid of car ownership in markets. And the technology is actually moving much quicker than we expected. Only a year ago, we were saying it's at least a decade away. But I think at least for public transportation, we will start to see it much sooner. Kareem's working on these driverless pods in partnership with the RTA to manage last mile solutions, to promote public transportation using these driverless pods. So as long as for business travelers, as long as the cost is being managed, customer service is higher, and the convenience is there, for them it's a winner.
Yeah, it's looking bright. Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions for the panel on this topic? There. No? Great. Well, thank you very much again for joining on the panel. Thank you very much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.